Hi everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thanks so much for joining me today. You might notice that I painted the wall behind me just to freshen up my workspace, and I just love the color. I think that's really pretty. But now I need something on the wall there. I used to have a big old mirror and it didn't really add very much. In fact, I've got another mirror already in front of that mirror, so it was pretty redundant. And so I want to make something to go onto that wall today. I could buy a piece of artwork, but it just wouldn't be that personal to me. And this is my sewing room, so I should sew something. I took a look around at what I had and what I was inspired by. So I have on hand all of these beautiful rainbow colors of broadcloth. Now, broadcloth is not the most beautiful to quilt with. If you're a good quilter, you definitely will prefer 100% cotton. But this is what I have, so I'm going to use that. I've got every color of the rainbow, plus black and brown, so I'm excited to do something with that rainbow of colors. So then I looked around and I was inspired by some really pretty and fun heart-shaped quilts. So that's what I'm going to do with my rainbow of colors. And I really just love the whole fun, positive, loving, and accepting vibe that that's going to give the room. So I'm excited to do that. So I worked out my design on paper based on the number of colors that I have and based on the size that I want it to end up. I wanted to end up about 28 inches by 28 to 30 inches tall. Which was about the size that the mirror was there. So I worked that out all on paper. On graph paper, I've got 1 square equals 1 inch. So this is 30 inches by 28 inches. And then I traced a heart shape onto the graph paper. And then I just put horizontal lines where the heart hits the graph paper. And just made sure both sides are equal. And so then that tells me how many inches long I need each strip. So the side here, this is 28 inches, that's going to be a whole strip of white. And then for the two sides, the brown and black, that's going to be 6 inches with 5 inches of white and 17 inches of white. The burgundy is going to be 11 inches with 3 and 14 of white. The red is 15 inches with 2 and 11 of white. The orange is 18 inches with 1 and 9 of white. The gold is 21 with 1 and 6 of white. The yellow is 22 inches with 4 and 2 of white. And the lime green right in the middle is going to be 23 inches with 3 and 2 of white. And then this side is now going to just mirror that one. So the green is the same as the yellow, the turquoise is the same as the gold, royal is the same as orange, blue is the same as red, purple is the same as burgundy, and black is the same as brown. I'll cut them in pairs. I'll start with the 2 long whites, and then the brown and black with their matching whites, the burgundy and purple with their matching whites. So I'm going to work my way in toward the center. And if you want to do exactly the same thing, you can just pause the video and take a screenshot of my screenshot. But otherwise, you can just work it out based on the colors that you have. And of course, it doesn't have to be all solid colors. You could even do this with a whole array of different prints, which would be really fun too. So you work out what you want to do, I'll work out what I'm going to do, and we can do it together. There are 2 other things we're going to need for this project, and one of them is some kind of batting to put in between our layers. So I like to use a batting called Warm and Natural. It's 100% cotton. It's just soft and beautiful. But any kind of batting will do. And then we'll need a piece of backing fabric for the whole quilt. We're also going to need some loops on the back, but we'll make that out of the same backing fabric. And I'm going to use kind of like a dowel for the top edge of my quilt. So I'm going to be going to the hardware store and getting them to cut me a piece of doweling about 28 inches long. Other than that, just your basic sewing stuff. Thread, sewing machine, all that good stuff. So I hope you sew along with me. I hope you have some fun with it. And if you do, please hit that subscribe button and the bell so you get notified whenever I put out a new video, because it would be great to have you along for some of my other sewing adventures too. I'm going to start cutting strips and we can jump right in. So a lot of the pieces that I have are already cut into strips. So I know I'm going to have to join some of them for the longer pieces. So to get those 2 long side parts, I'm going to stack 4 pieces because I'll be joining them into 2s, and I'm doing both sides at once. Good. And now my measurements here are the finished piece. So I have to add seam allowance to all 4 sides for all my pieces. So if this piece is going to finish at 28 inches by 2, I'm going to be adding a 1/4 inch on each side, so 1/2 inch total. So I'm going to cut that piece 28.5 by 2.5. They're all going to be 2.5 wide, but the two sides are going to be 28.5 long. But I have to join them, so that gives me another seam. So I have to add another 1/4 inch. So 14.5 by 2.5. If you're going to use a rotary cutter, please keep in mind to use a heavy ruler with it. Never a light and flimsy ruler. 2.5 wide. 14.5 for my length here. That is my first and last strip. For the brown and black, I need them still 2.5 inches wide, but the brown and black have to be 6.5 inches long. So 2.5 by 6.5. And then for the white parts on the brown and black section, I need 2 pieces that are 17.5. So those pieces are just barely 17.5. This whole thing has to be pretty darn accurate. If my grid says 2.5 inches wide, I absolutely have to make sure it is 2.5 inches wide the whole way. And then I need the 5.5 for the other end of the flower block. So then when I get all the pieces for one row, I'm going to pin that together. So there's my second row. Okay, so the burgundy and purple are 11 plus 1/2. I'm trying to be organized as I go, folding up the fabrics that I'm done with, and keeping my rows all organized. So there's row number 3. Row number 4 is the blue and red. They are 15.5 inches long. There's the blue and red row. So here's the my 5th row now. There's the 5th row. And there's row number 6. And there's the yellow and green row. And then now it's just the center row. Okay, so all my strips are cut and pinned together, all my scraps and all the fabrics I'm done with. Okay, wonderful. So I've repinned all of my strips. Originally, I just had them pinned together as I cut them, but now they are all pinned together in the individual strips. So I'm just going to join all of my pieces. I'm going to use white thread for everything, and I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance or the edge of my presser foot as a guide. Small little back tack at the beginning and end of each of these pieces. And then I'm just going to feed the next bit in. So I'm going to be chaining all of these together. So I just need to make sure that I've continued with the same right side. Do you know what I mean? That this fabric doesn't have a right and a wrong side, but now that I've sewn a seam in it, now it does. This is now the right side, so I need to make sure all of my strips are right side together. Chaining them all together speeds you up a lot. It also saves you thread, which means it saves you time winding another bobbin, and it also prevents your fabric from getting stuck at the beginning of a seam because you always have 2 ends of the fabric underneath the presser foot, so it doesn't get stuck in there as much. I'm a big fan of chain stitching whenever I can. But just because you're chaining doesn't mean you don't do your back tacks. Just remember small little back tack at beginning and end of every seam. All those strips are joined and chained together. I'm going to snip those apart. So now here at the iron, where I'm joining 2 of the same color, I'm going to press open and flat. The flatter that I can make that, the more hidden that seam will be. Here where I'm joining a color to white, I'm going to press toward the color because the darker color will help hide that seam allowance. It won't shadow through. If you press from the wrong side and then from the right side and really make sure you've got it open right out flat, you'll get a really beautiful flat seam. So the strips are all joined and I lay them back on the table according to my drawing. So that's kind of just my little check to see if I'm happy. And I love all the colors. I think it's gonna be just so pretty, but I'm worried that it's just gonna look kind of like a big triangle and not like a heart. So I'm gonna look at, if I drag this middle one down a bit, I think that makes it more heart shape. So unfortunately, that means I have to recut the two white pieces. So I guess it looks to me like I'm cutting this one 1 inch longer. So that means that my drawing here would be 4 inches instead of 3 at the top of the lime. 4 inches there. Yeah, the lime will be 22 and we'll keep the 2 inches at the bottom there. So 4, 22, and 2. Okay, so I quickly just did a swap. I removed the piece that was 3.5 inches long, replaced it with a piece that's 4.5 inches long, but I want to keep the whole strip the same length. So this one's 1 inch longer, so I cut 1 inch off the lime green. So let's try that out. Good, I do think that's a much better proportion, just with that green dropped a little bit. So now I'm just going to join the strips together, but instead of just going back and forth to my machine with one strip at a time, I think I'll just pin them into pairs and then sew those pairs and then come back to this table. I better not flip a whole bunch because I might sew the wrong edge. Right side together, so it's this edge. And then it's this edge. And the nice thing with this is that I don't have any intersections where I have to really match seams. All the seams are at different heights, except for right at the top of these two and these two. That's the only intersection that has to match. So right here, I definitely want to have that just nailed right together there. Good, so I'll sew these pairs together and then I'll press those seams open, lay it all out again, and then pin more together. Okay, and then right here I want to make sure this seam allowance stays going up the way I pressed it. It's really easy on the underside for seam allowance to get pushed down, so just check, make sure it stays going up. On a longer seam like this, I like to press it flat first just to set the thread. And then open it up and press that open and flat. So press it from the inside and then from the outside. So press each seam 3 times now. First of all, just flat, then open from the inside and then the outside. Then we have a beautiful flat seam. I also want to guard against little threads like that. Colored threads are in behind the white. You're always going to see that. Good, so I've got the pairs sewn together and pressed flat. It's starting to look more like a heart as the strips get more narrow and then the shape is more apparent. Okay, so I do find that's a nice way to stay organized, is just pinning in pairs first, sewing those together, pressing, and then coming back. So I'm going to repeat that process, and I'm going to just pin pairs together now. So this saves me from running back and forth to the sewing machine 15 times. And there's another spot that where the seams intersect. So back to the machine and then back to the iron. And again, press 3 times each. Good, so very happy still, looking beautiful, except this one piece. So I'm gonna unpick those 3 sides, replace that piece. Then I've just got 3 more seams to sew and the whole face will be done. Okay, so the whole quilt face is done. And so the 2 little fixes that I had, right? I replaced this piece because I had cut that one about 1/2 inch too short. I guess I just forgot to add the 1/2 inch of seam allowance when I was cutting. And this piece I replaced, and both of those were totally worth doing. Before dropping that down, it was just too much of a big triangle shape, so that dip in the middle makes it look definitely more like a heart. Good. So I'm placing it on the batting now, on that warm and natural batting. I've got a piece that's a little bit bigger. So this piece is about 28 by 30 inches. So I cut the warm and natural to be 30 by 32. So just a couple inches extra. Before I sew these 2 layers together, I want to give like a really good check over, because any colored threads or colored dots that are behind are going to show through the white. So I don't know if you can see here, but this would bug me. There's like a little pale green thread there. And so I need to remove it now before I seal these 2 together. Also, any little threads, if you can see here, a little thread like that, no big deal, right? But if you cut it close there, it's just always going to be that little tiny bit. So I prefer to go inside and find where that thread is coming out and pulling it from the back. So a really good check over, especially through all of the white areas. I might just put another piece of white fabric in behind, just because that warm and natural, as much as I like it, it is showing through and making my seam allowance show, and it's just looking creamy instead of a bright white that I wanted. So I'm going to put an extra layer of white behind this. So I did cut a piece of white cotton, and I'm layering it now with the quilt face, the white cotton, and then the warm and natural. It just looks cleaner and neater with that white in behind. When I started sewing each of the strips together, I started at the top. So that's fairly well lined up, but I am going to just straighten it out just to make 100% sure. But at the bottom here, where I ended each, there's a lot of variation. So with one of my friction markers, I'm just going to use my big ruler here and get a line going straight across the bottom of the quilt face. And I'm going to trust that the sides are fine. But let's just see about that top edge. The top edge has more variation in it than I thought, so I'm glad. I'm just going to be squaring that right off. So you'll notice I pinned my pins all pointing like in a circle around, just so that it's just easier to remove your pins. Think of it as with the edge on your right, you want your pin pointing away from you. Now, my next step is back to the sewing machine. I'm going to do a zigzag stitch right along that edge all the way around. So I want to make sure that this doesn't shift around on me at all. So a lot of pins are useful. Putting quite a few pins, and if you've got the awesome plastic clips, that's a good time to use them as well. Because even though it's laying nice and flat right now on the table, once I lift it up and get it to the sewing machine, it could still shift around quite a bit. I'm using a regular zigzag with 3 width and 3 length. And it doesn't matter where I start because I'm going to be going all the way around. When I'm doing this zigzag, I want my needle to go on the fabric and just barely off the fabric, and back on and off and on and off. So I'm really right on the edge of the quilt face. On the top and bottom edges, I'm zigzagging right over that red line. And do you see here how this extra is starting to build up there? I don't want any extra to move to the next section. I want to work that in as much as I can. Otherwise, I'm going to have a big pleat by the time I get to the other side. Okay, and a quick touch with the iron should get rid of my friction pen line. Look at that. Oh no, look at that. Oh no. Can you see that? That's a bad one. Oh, darn it. So I'm going to have to go in here. There it is. Okay. And I just quickly ran back to the machine and replaced that zigzag. So I think we're good. And now I'm going to be cutting off the excess right beside my zigzag. Not cutting my stitches, but coming pretty close all the way around. Okay, so I've trimmed around the whole entire quilt face, and I've cut another piece of white that is about 2 inches bigger all the way around, and I've pressed it flat, and now I'm going to put it behind the quilt face. And I also ran to the hardware store and got this little piece of skinny dowel, 6/16 of an inch, and it cost me $2.50, and it took them about 10 seconds to cut it for me. Good. And then with about 2 inches of extra sticking out all around. Good. So get all the layers smooth. I'll pin all the way around. You want to use quite a few pins or else it will shift around on you when you're sewing it. So with this pinned all the way around, now I'm just going to put a straight stitch right on top of that zigzag all the way around. And then I'll be trimming off this extra. We're just going to back up that train because I forgot I'm putting loops on the back to be able to put the dowel through. I want to sew several loops, and I want to sew it within this boundary, the edge here, and where I'm going to be sewing this edge down to the other side. So I've got about a 1 centimeter space in there. So I've got the section of fabric that I tore off the end. Okay. So I'm going to tear a piece that is just 2 inches wide, about 15 inches long. So first of all, flatten it out. Then fold in half, press. So now I'm opening it out, and you see that crease down the middle. I'll just bring both edges in to meet that crease. And then same on the other side, bring that edge in just a touch. You don't want to have an overlap in the middle there, just a touch. And then the whole thing goes in half, nice and neat. Try to get these two free edges even and press all the way down the whole length again. And now I'm just sewing those two folded edges together. And then just give a second press just to flatten it all out and set the thread. Little loops that I want on the back are just going to be about that big. I've got 5 pieces that are just under 3 inches long. So I am glad I have this pinned all together so I can see exactly where I need to be sewing these little loops. I'm taking that about 1 inch and then folding that little end down over it. And I'm placing them one in the center, one at each corner, and then one in between. I'm just pinning it to my backing layer. I can't have the corner ones too close to the corner because we're going to be binding that edge. So the same distance I need to clear the top, I also need to clear the side. Like I do have the rest of it still pinned because I don't want this to shift around on me at all, right? I want those to sit right where they are. So the rest of the quilt is going to stay out of my way. Just this backing layer is going to come up here. And then for each of these little loops, I'm just going to do a back tack across the top and the bottom. With those 5 loops on the back. Now I can get back to smoothing this all out. Everything is still nice and smooth. And then I'll just finish pinning this top edge. And now I'm doing a straight stitch all the way around right on top of that zigzag. So now if you bought one of these see-through rulers that I keep recommending, now's when you're going to be really happy. This middle line is 1 inch from the edge. And so I'm going to lay that middle line right on top of the edge of my quilt so that I can draw 1 inch all the way around. And if you bought these friction pens, you'll be happy with them now too. So even though I snipped and tore this edge, I can't now snip and tear this because it has to be exactly 1 inch from the edge. And even if I tear, it might start off exactly 1 inch from the edge, but my tear is going to follow the threads in here instead of following that edge. So now I'm cutting right exactly on that line I just drew. So now at the iron, I'm going to just be bringing my edge up just to touch the outside edge of the quilt and press down and then turn a second time and wrap that around. And same on all four sides. So the first is just bringing the edge just into touch. So at the intersection where I'm meeting where I've already pressed, I'm actually going to unfold that corner and then turn again. Okay, so now I'm on the last side, so I have to unfold the first one so that I can fold the last one. We will eventually be sewing right down on that line, but first I'm going to miter the corners. Here's how I'm going to miter the corners, nice easy way. I'm going to fold the quilt back on its point like that. So I'm bringing this corner wrong sides together, like the back of the quilt together. Okay, so you can see this point of the quilt coming across. I'll be putting this in the machine horizontally like that and sewing perpendicular to that fold. And I'll sew right from that point down just to this fold, and I'll stop right there. So it's just a little short line like that at all four corners. So find your point, like these edges on the side here come together. This line goes straight into the machine, like coming across the machine, so that I'm going to sew from that point perpendicular to my fold here. And I'm going to stop right at that fold. While I'm at this corner, I'm going to just trim off about a quarter inch away from the line I just sewed. I'll flip it out, poke out my point of my quilt nice and pointy, and tuck in my edges. And there you go, a beautiful mitered corner. And I'll do that at all four corners. Okay, the mitered corner just worked out great. I can touch that again with the iron. So nice. And then I'm going to put pins with the edge on my right, my pins all pointing away from me so that it doesn't shift around on me while I just sew close to that inside edge. I'm starting in the middle at the bottom, and there's really no place to hide your back tack. This whole edge is going to show, so I'm just going to be doing a very tiny back tack. Okay, and I am just aiming for this inside edge, just about 1 millimeter or 1/16 of an inch from that inside fold. Nice clean pivot, and come on up the side. Okay, it is done, and I totally love it. I'm actually not going to quilt it, so it really is just a patchwork piece. It's not technically a quilt, but I just want to hang it up. So to hang my quilt, I first of all decided how high up I wanted and made a mark, and then took my big long level and drew a line level across. Then I picked up the quilt and I marked an X in between each of the loops. And then I stuck in 4 thumbtacks, and that little skinny dowel just sat on the thumbtacks perfectly. Et voila! So there it is. I just love it. I think it's so pretty. I love the message of love and acceptance and celebration. I hope you had fun with that, and I'll see you right back here next time on Catherine Sews. Thanks so much. You take care.